Back in 1994, Adelaide still felt like a big country town. It was known for its churches, its wine, and that quiet, almost sleepy pace of life. Folks left their doors unlocked, honestly believing they were safe. Organized crime, the kind that plagued Sydney or Melbourne, seemed a world away. Bombings, well, they just didn't happen here. The city's sense of security was more than just a feeling. It was a core part of its identity, a shared belief that the worst of the world's troubles stopped at its borders. But all of that was about to be shattered in a single terrifying moment, one that would scar Adelaide's soul for decades to come. On March 2nd, the day began like any other. The morning sun stretched long shadows across the neat streets of the CBD. Office workers grabbed their coffees, and the city hummed along with the gentle rhythm of daily life. On Weymouth Street, a handsome bluestone building housed the Adelaide office of the National Crime Authority, the front line in the federal fight against organized crime. Most folks walking by saw just another office block, its real purpose hidden behind a veil of bureaucratic normalcy. But to those on the wrong side of the law, it was a symbol, a threat that needed to be eliminated. Just before 10:15, the illusion of peace was shattered. A powerful explosion ripped through the ground floor of the NCA building, sending a shockwave of sound and fury across the city center. Windows blew out, and the street filled with a thick, choking cloud of smoke and dust. The blast tore a gaping hole in the building's facade, turning a place of order into chaos. For a moment, there was stunned silence. Then came the sirens and the screams. Adelaide's innocence had been blown apart, and the city would never feel quite the same again. This wasn't some distant act of terror seen on the news. This was a direct assault on the heart of South Australia's capital and on the rule of law itself. The bomb, delivered in a parcel, was a message, written in the language of violence and intimidation. It announced that organized crime had reached even this quiet corner of Australia, and it was willing to use extreme force to protect its interests. The attack was unprecedented, the first fatal bombing of a law enforcement agency in Australian history. The city and the nation were left to grapple with a terrifying new reality. The hunt for the person responsible was about to begin, a quest for justice that would stretch on for nearly 3 decades. Domenic Perre was not a man to be taken lightly. He was a significant figure in the world of organized crime, a world he navigated with cunning, ruthlessness, and a volatile temper. Born in Calabria, the heartland of the Ndrangheta, Perre immigrated to Australia and quickly established himself in the criminal underworld. He wasn't just some back-alley thug. He was a sophisticated operator. His main business was cultivating and trafficking high-grade cannabis. He ran large-scale hydroponic operations tucked away on rural properties, and these generated millions of dollars. It wasn't just a criminal enterprise. It was a family business, built on loyalty, secrecy, and a deep distrust of authority. Perre's criminal record painted a picture of a man who lived by his own rules. He had a history of violence and firearms offenses, and police knew him as a major player. But in his own mind, he was a successful businessman, a patriarch providing for his family. He cultivated an image of a community member, but beneath that was paranoia and a ferocious hatred for law enforcement. He believed police were corrupt and existed only to harass him and destroy his life's work. This wasn't just a dislike, it was an obsession. He saw any investigation into his affairs as a personal vendetta, and he wasn't afraid to retaliate. The motive for the bombing was deeply personal, rooted in this intense hatred and a desire for revenge. Just a day before the explosion, police had raided a multi-million-dollar cannabis plantation linked directly to Perre and his family. It was a major blow, not just financially, but to his pride. He felt cornered, humiliated, and enraged. The NCA, along with South Australia Police, had been closing in on his empire, and this raid was the final straw. He saw Detective Geoffrey Bowen, who was leading the NCA investigation, as the architect of his downfall. In Perre's warped view, Bowen wasn't just doing his job. He was a personal enemy who needed to be taught a lesson. The plan for revenge was as cold-blooded as it was brutal. Perre, who knew how to make bombs, meticulously constructed a parcel bomb. It wasn't just meant to scare, it was designed to kill. He wanted to send a clear and terrifying message to law enforcement: stay away from Domenic Perre. This was the ultimate act of defiance, a declaration of war against the very system that sought to hold him accountable. He believed he was untouchable, protected by a wall of silence and fear. The bomb was his way of ensuring that anyone who dared to challenge him would pay the ultimate price. It was a calculated act of terror, born from a mind consumed by arrogance and rage. The parcel arrived at the NCA office on the morning of March 2nd, 1994. It looked ordinary: brown paper and tape, addressed to Detective Sergeant Geoffrey Bowen. Nothing about it screamed danger. In a busy federal law enforcement office, receiving mail and evidence packages was just routine. The parcel landed on Bowen's desk, another task in a long list for the day. Bowen was a dedicated and highly respected officer, known for his meticulous work dismantling organized crime networks. He was a family man, a father of two, and the driving force behind the investigation into Domenic Perre's drug syndicate. He was just doing his job. When Bowen picked up the package, he had no idea he was holding his own death warrant. As he began to open it, the device detonated. The explosion was catastrophic. The sheer force of the blast killed him instantly, turning his office into a scene of unimaginable horror. The bomb was packed with shrapnel, designed for maximum injury and devastation. It blew a hole through the floor, sending lethal fragments flying in all directions. The sound was deafening, a visceral roar that shook the building and echoed through the streets of Adelaide. It signaled a new, darker chapter in the city's history. The violence wasn't confined to Bowen. Peter Wallis, a lawyer for the NCA, was in an adjacent office and happened to be walking past at the exact moment of the explosion. The blast threw him across the room, leaving him horrifically injured. He lost an eye and suffered severe burns and other life-altering injuries. His survival was a miracle, but his life was changed forever. The physical and psychological scars of that day would remain with him for the rest of his life. He became another victim of Perre's calculated act of vengeance, a man in the wrong place at the utterly wrong time, caught in the crossfire of a war he wasn't fighting. The aftermath was chaos. The building filled with smoke, the air thick with the smell of explosives and burning material. Injured and dazed staff stumbled onto the street, while emergency services rushed to the scene, confronted by a level of carnage they'd never seen in their city. The bombing of the NCA was more than just a murder. It was a direct assault on the Australian justice system. It was an act of domestic terrorism meant to intimidate and terrorize law enforcement across the country. It sent a chilling message: no one was safe, and the fight against organized crime could have deadly consequences. The hunt for the killer had begun. In the immediate aftermath of the bombing, the investigation began with ferocious intensity. South Australia Police, together with federal agencies, threw every available resource at the case. The crime scene on Weymouth Street was painstakingly combed for every shred of evidence. It was a massive and complex job. The blast had destroyed so much, leaving investigators to sift through a chaotic mess of debris piece by piece. The public was shocked and outraged, and the pressure to find the person responsible was immense. From the very start, one name topped the list of suspects: Domenic Perre. The motive was obvious, and the timing was just too perfect to be coincidence. But building a case that would stand up in court proved incredibly tough. Perre was arrested and questioned right away, but he was a seasoned criminal who knew how to handle police interrogation. He denied everything, saying he was at his mother's house at the time of the bombing. Investigators worked tirelessly to find that forensic link, the single piece of evidence that would tie him directly to the bomb. They searched his home and properties, looking for any trace of explosives, any tool marks, or DNA that could place him at the scene of the bomb's preparation. But Perre was careful. He'd covered his tracks, leaving behind no obvious clues. The investigation hit a major roadblock when the Director of Public Prosecutions made a critical decision. After reviewing the evidence, the DPP concluded it just wasn't strong enough to guarantee a conviction. There was a mountain of circumstantial evidence: the motive, the timing, his expertise. But there was no smoking gun, no fingerprint on the parcel remnants, no DNA, no eyewitness who saw him post the package. Without that definitive forensic link, the risk of losing the case in court was just too high. In September 1994, only 6 months after the bombing, the charges against Domenic Perre were dropped. For the victims, the police and the public, this was a devastating blow. It felt like a failure of the justice system. The man everyone believed responsible for this heinous act was walking free. The case officially went cold, but it never truly went away. It lingered in the minds of investigators, a constant reminder of a job unfinished. Detective Bowen's family was left without answers, and Peter Wallis was left to live with his horrific injuries, knowing the man who caused them had escaped justice. The case file grew thicker, filled with old reports and interviews, a monument to a frustrating and heartbreaking investigation that had stalled, but was not yet over. Section 5. New hope from old evidence. The rise of Task Force Cornus. Years turned into decades, but the ghost of the NCA bombing never left the halls of South Australia Police. The case was a deep wound, a constant source of frustration for the detectives who had lived and breathed it back in 1994. By 2015, the world had changed. Forensic science in particular had undergone, well, a revolution. Techniques that were science fiction in the 1990s were now standard procedure. DNA analysis had become incredibly sensitive, capable of identifying even microscopic traces left behind at a crime scene. It was this leap in technology that provided a glimmer of hope. Senior police decided it was time to look at the case again, to see if modern science could find what the methods of the 1990s had missed. A new joint investigation, named Task Force Cornus, was formed. It was a collaboration between South Australia Police, the Australian Federal Police, and the Australian Criminal Intelligence Commission, the successor to the NCA. This wasn't just about retesting old exhibits, it was a complete top-to-bottom review of the entire case. Detectives meticulously went through every piece of paper in the original file, every witness statement, every scrap of evidence that had been carefully preserved for more than 20 years. They were looking for new leads, for inconsistencies in old stories, and for opportunities to apply modern forensic techniques to physical evidence from the bomb scene. The breakthrough they were looking for came from the most unlikely of sources. Scientists using advanced DNA profiling techniques were able to re-examine key pieces of evidence recovered from the blast site. On a tiny fragment of the brown paper wrapping from the bomb, they found something incredible. They isolated a DNA profile. It was a partial profile, but it was enough. When they compared it to the DNA of Domenic Perre, they found a match. After more than 2 decades, they finally had the direct forensic link that had eluded the original investigation. This was the smoking gun they had always needed, a microscopic key that could unlock the entire case. Armed with this powerful new evidence, Task Force Cornus detectives began to quietly re-interview old witnesses. People who may have been too scared to talk in 1994, or whose information seemed insignificant at the time, were approached again. With the passage of time, some allegiances had shifted, and some people were now more willing to speak. The new DNA evidence gave investigators the leverage they needed to rebuild the circumstantial case around Perre, piece by painstaking piece. The cold case was heating up fast. In 2018, nearly 24 years after the bombing, Domenic Perre was arrested again. This time, the police were confident they had what they needed to see justice done. The trial of Domenic Perre began in the Supreme Court of South Australia in 2020. It was a trial without a jury, presided over by a single judge, Justice Kevin Nicholson. This decision was made due to the immense pre-trial publicity and, honestly, the complex nature of the evidence. The courtroom was the final stage for a drama that had been playing out for over a quarter of a century. The prosecution laid out its case with meticulous detail, painting a picture of a man driven by a cold-blooded desire for revenge. They presented the powerful new DNA evidence as the centerpiece of their argument, the undeniable link between Perre and the bomb that killed Geoffrey Bowen. The prosecution's case was built on 3 main pillars: motive, opportunity, and forensics. They detailed Perre's deep-seated hatred for Detective Bowen and the NCA, They presented witness testimony suggesting Perre had the knowledge and materials to build a sophisticated bomb. And most importantly, they had the DNA found on the parcel wrapping. They also presented evidence from witnesses who said Perre had made admissions about the bombing over the years, boasting in veiled terms about his role in the attack. The defense, in turn, argued that the DNA evidence was inconclusive and could have been the result of contamination. They portrayed Perre as the victim of a long-running police vendetta. The trial was a long and arduous process, lasting for months. It involved complex scientific arguments and the testimony of dozens of witnesses, some of whom were recalling events from more than 2 decades prior. The weight of history hung heavy in the courtroom. For the families of the victims and the police officers who had worked the case, it was a grueling but necessary ordeal. They sat through every day of testimony, waiting for the verdict they had sought for so long. The entire state watched, hoping for a resolution to one of the darkest chapters in its history. Perre himself remained defiant throughout, maintaining his innocence with the same arrogance he had shown for years. In June 2022, Justice Nicholson delivered his verdict. He found Domenic Perre guilty of the murder of Detective Geoffrey Bowen and the attempted murder of lawyer Peter Wallis. The judge described the bombing as a barbaric and vicious attack, an act of terrorism designed to intimidate the entire justice system. He sentenced Perre to life in prison, with a non-parole period of 30 years and 7 months. Even then, Perre refused to accept his fate. He launched an appeal against his conviction, but he would not live to see it heard. In May 2023, just 2 days after his appeal was rejected, Domenic Perre died in custody from a heart condition. The long pursuit of justice was finally and definitively over. To understand why Domenic Perre targeted the building on Weymouth Street, you have to understand what the National Crime Authority was. Established by the Australian government in 1984, the NCA was a new and powerful type of law enforcement agency. It was created specifically to fight the growing threat of organized crime, which in the 1980s was becoming more sophisticated and entrenched. Traditional state-based policing was struggling to keep up with criminal networks that operated across state lines and international borders. The NCA was designed to overcome these challenges, with special powers to investigate, gather intelligence, and disrupt the highest levels of the Australian underworld. The NCA was different from a regular police force. It had the power to compel witnesses to attend secret hearings, known as coercive hearings, and force them to answer questions under oath. Refusing to cooperate could result in jail time for contempt. This was a powerful tool that allowed the agency to break through the code of silence that so often protected organized crime figures. The NCA could also share intelligence seamlessly between different police forces across the country, creating a unified front against major criminal syndicates. For criminals like Domenic Perre, the NCA represented a far greater threat than any local police department. It was a federal watchdog with long teeth and a very long reach. This is precisely why Perre saw the NCA, and Detective Geoffrey Bowen in particular, as his mortal enemy. The NCA's investigation into his cannabis empire was systematic and relentless. They weren't just looking to seize one crop, they were trying to dismantle his entire operation. They were tracing his money, identifying his associates, and building a comprehensive picture of his criminal world. Detective Bowen was the face of this threat. He was the one leading the charge, the one coordinating the surveillance and the raids. In Perre's mind, the NCA wasn't just enforcing the law, it was launching a personal attack on his livelihood and his family. The agency's effectiveness made it a target. By bombing the NCA office, Perre was doing more than just trying to kill one detective. He was sending a message to the entire Australian law enforcement community. He was trying to terrorize them into backing off. The choice of target was deliberate and symbolic. He didn't plant a bomb at a police station. He attacked the nation's elite crime-fighting agency. It was an act of supreme arrogance and defiance, a declaration that he was beyond the reach of the law and that he would meet force with greater force. The attack was intended to create a climate of fear, to make every NCA officer in the country look over their shoulder and wonder if they could be next. The conviction of Domenic Perre for the NCA bombing is more than just the closing of a single case. It is a landmark moment in the history of Australian law enforcement. The bombing itself was a watershed event. It was the first and only fatal attack on a law enforcement agency in the country's history. It brutally demonstrated that Australia was not immune to the kind of targeted terroristic violence seen in other parts of the world. The attack fundamentally changed the way police and federal agencies approached their own security. Buildings were hardened, procedures were changed, and a new level of vigilance became the norm. The age of innocence was over. The case also stands as a powerful testament to the importance of police persistence and the relentless pursuit of justice. For 28 years, the case remained unsolved in the public eye, a painful open wound. But behind the scenes, detectives never gave up. They kept the files, preserved the evidence, and waited. The success of Task Force Cornus shows that no case is ever truly cold. It highlights the incredible value of cold case units, which combine old-fashioned detective work with cutting-edge science. The ability to re-examine evidence with new technology gave investigators the breakthrough they needed, proving that even the most careful criminals can leave behind a trace that will one day lead to their downfall. Furthermore, the Perre case sent a powerful and unambiguous message to the world of organized crime. It demonstrated that no matter how much time passes, law enforcement will not forget and will not give up. The conviction showed that even the most feared and powerful crime bosses are not above the law. It undermined the myth of the untouchable gangster, proving that the justice system, while sometimes slow, is incredibly patient. This has a significant deterrent effect. It tells other criminals that their actions will have consequences, even if those consequences take decades to arrive. It reinforces the rule of law over the rule of violence. Finally, the case provided a profound, albeit delayed, sense of closure for the victims and their families. For the family of Geoffrey Bowen, and for Peter Wallis, the conviction was a validation of their long and painful wait for justice. It officially acknowledged their suffering and held the man responsible to account. For the Australian public, it closed a dark chapter and reaffirmed faith in the justice system. The story of the NCA bombing is a grim reminder of the costs of fighting organized crime, but the final conviction is a story of resilience, dedication, and the ultimate triumph of justice over evil. It is a case that will be studied in police academies for generations to come. The legacy of the 1994 NCA bombing is complex and far-reaching. It is a story of tragedy and loss, but also one of incredible resilience and determination. The bomb that Domenic Perre built did more than kill one good man and maim another. It forced Australia to confront the reality of organized crime in a way it never had before. It showed that the fight against these powerful syndicates was not a distant battle fought by others, but a real and present danger that could strike at the heart of our cities. The attack spurred a significant evolution in how Australian law enforcement agencies protect themselves and combat domestic terrorism and organized violence. The case also became a beacon for the power of forensic science. The initial investigation stalled because the technology of the day simply wasn't enough to find the crucial link. The eventual conviction, secured almost 3 decades later, was a direct result of scientific advancement. The ability to extract a usable DNA profile from a tiny, degraded sample of paper that was over 20 years old is a remarkable achievement. It underscores a fundamental truth in modern policing. Evidence must be meticulously preserved because the scientific tools of tomorrow may be able to unlock the secrets it holds. This case serves as a powerful precedent for reinvestigating other cold cases across the country. Most importantly, the pursuit of Domenic Perre highlights the human element of justice. It is a story about the unwavering dedication of police officers who refused to let the case die. Detectives who were young officers in 1994 were senior investigators on Task Force Cornus, carrying the memory of their fallen colleague with them every day. It is a story about the courage of witnesses who came forward and about the prosecutors who built an intricate case brick by brick. It is also a profound story about the endurance of the victims' families, who waited patiently for a justice they never stopped believing in. Their dignity in the face of immense loss was a constant motivation for those seeking the truth. Today, on July 15th, 2025, the fight against organized crime continues. The criminal networks are more sophisticated than ever, operating globally in cyberspace and dealing in drugs, fraud, and human misery on an industrial scale. The lesson of the NCA bombing is that this fight requires constant vigilance, innovation, and above all, patience. Domenic Perre believed his act of terror would make him invincible. Instead, it sealed his fate. His story is not one of triumph, but a cautionary tale. It is the ultimate proof that the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends toward justice. The memory of Geoffrey Bowen lives on, not as a victim, but as a symbol of the price of law and order, and the enduring commitment to uphold it.